One of the most important functions of the safety team is to attempt to identify workplace hazards before serious incidents occur. At Nelson Tree Service, managers and safety personnel have a variety of ways to accomplish this goal, but none is more important or effective than the Safety Behavior Assessment, or SBA. Safety behavior assessments are an important field tool used to determine the effectiveness of company safety initiatives and judge how well employees are adhering to safety policies. Patterns of unsafe practices, behaviors, and work conditions can be identified through the accumulation of data and the information used to address emerging trends. The purpose of this video is to provide some guidelines for effectively completing SBAs. Afterwards, you should be able to correctly record collected data, effectively reinforce safe work practices, understand how to efficiently communicate with crews about undesirable practices and solicit behavioral change, convey to the crew what it means to have a commitment to safety. An important part of the SBA process is the creation of an atmosphere of open communication, where employees become willing participants in the accumulation of safety information gathered for the benefit of themselves as well as the organization as a whole. Effective SBA observations of employee work activities are done in a positive manner and mustn't be confused with crew audits or inspections, which are typically long and intense. Remember, SBAs are an information gathering and training tool and should only be used for discipline in extreme cases. The most important aspects of an SBA are the opportunities for coaching and interaction with the crew. There are 6 steps to the SBA process. Observe, then contact. Thank the employee. Comment on safe behavior. Discuss the observations. Discuss other safety issues. Get agreement to work safely. Let's look at the process. The first step of the SBA, observe, then contact, should be started as soon as you arrive at a job site. As you approach the crew, observe posted speed limit signs and advance warning sign placement. The first few moments of the visit offer the best opportunity to observe crews in their natural state before they're aware they're about to be evaluated. Use this time to look for obvious safety concerns. Observe whether or not proper PPE is being worn and whether there are any job site setup problems, including proper placement of wheel chocks, outriggers, and cones. When parking, attempt to avoid the buffer area directly behind the crew's equipment. The rear buffer is designed to provide a lengthy warning zone for traffic before encountering the actual worksite. Parking in the rear buffer can shorten the available warning time for oncoming drivers and may negatively impact the integrity of the work zone. Instead, try to park safely off-road, away from the job site, or, if necessary, directly in front of the crew's work truck. Of course, emergency flashers and lights must be activated whenever parking along a roadway. Establishing the proper atmosphere for the SBA is very important. Simply exiting the vehicle and starting to write information on a clipboard can send the wrong signal to the crew, making them nervous and negatively impacting the SBA process. Upon arrival, the supervisor should make contact with the crew before starting to document what's observed. A common employee concern is that supervisor evaluations translate to information being gathered to use against them. Be aware of this concern and make an effort to explain the purpose of your visit, the SBA process, and how the information is going to be used.
We'll be fine and just going to take a look around.
Once introductions have been made and the proper atmosphere established, make sure you have the correct spelling of each person's name and write them in the spaces provided to the right of members at the top of the SBA form. Ask the crew foreperson for the crew number, beginning with the first 3 numbers of their region, and enter it to the right of SBA number 1 crew number or SBA number 2 crew number, whichever is appropriate. The evaluator will also enter their own personal information into the spaces provided at the top of the SBA form. Finally, ask the crew to resume their work. Let them know that you need them to continue working until your observations are complete. Let them know that at the end of the process you'll gather them back together and talk about what you've seen. While the crew works, begin direct observations of their on-the-job behaviors as outlined on the SBA form. The SBA process is intended to provide a snapshot of crew activities and should only take about 15 to 20 minutes to complete. Avoid turning the process into a full-blown audit. Allow the crew to do their work with as little interference as possible. However, if acts are witnessed that could seriously threaten someone's well-being, work must be stopped immediately and the situation addressed according to regional and corporate policy. As previously mentioned, the SBA form is designed for recording 2 separate crew visits. Crew number 1 will have their data recorded under the column titled SBA number 1, and crew number 2 in the column under SBA number 2. Generally, the numbers of times safe and unsafe behaviors are actually observed are documented. However, there are 2 instances where findings don't have to be directly witnessed in order to be recorded on the SBA. The first instance is in determining the thoroughness of the crew's job briefing. In order to make a proper assessment, the evaluator will need to review the job briefing form and question crew members about their pre-work discussion. Crew members should be able to talk about identified hazards, precautions they've taken, and each person's specific job responsibilities at the worksite. The second area where behaviors can be recorded without actually having been observed is after recently accomplished notching and back cutting. If the crew has been doing removals and stumps are immediately available for viewing, the evaluator can observe the stumps for proper hinge wood, notches, bypass cuts, and proper placement of back cuts. Some SBA categories are deemed to be the collective responsibility of the entire crew, and they're indicated in bold type on the SBA form. Observations in these categories are made only once per visit and are recorded by writing a number 1 in either the safe or unsafe column. Examples of collective responsibility items are job briefings, advance warning signs, channelizing devices, generally cones, flagging operations, vehicle parking, and outrigger placement. Observations made in all other categories are recorded by entering the number of times each safe or unsafe behavior is observed. However, the categories for hard hats, safety glasses, proper footwear, and safety vests will directly reflect the number of people working on the crew. For instance, a 2 written in the safe column under hard hats probably means that it's a 2-person crew, 1 safe entry per person. In the categories involving crew work activities, it's completely possible to record several operations per category. For instance, under pruner operations, a bucket operator may use their pole pruner more than once to trim back different limbs. They may safely use their pruner in one general area before stopping and repositioning to safely make additional pruning cuts. Then, they may move a significant distance to another area and safely use their pruner to snip some more limbs. In this case, a 3 would be written in the safe column to indicate observing 3 different safe pruner operations. Another example of multiple observations within the same category might be the use of chainsaws. A ground worker could be observed safely bucking a tree, turning their saw off to carry some wood to the chipper, and then returning to restart their saw and begin safely working again. This would be recorded as 2 separate safe chainsaw observations. We've already covered job briefings in some detail, but we need to mention again the importance of thoroughly quizzing the crew about this important function. Take time to make sure all 5 components of an effective job briefing were discussed, and to verify that each person knows their specific job assignments. Review how the job briefing form has been completed, and note whether it appears to have been pencil whipped. Be thorough and make sure the crew understands the importance of doing and recording their job briefings well. Let them know that conducting job briefings is a legal requirement, as well as an important tool intended to make them aware of all the potential hazards they could encounter at the job site. Scoring for the job briefing category is a collective responsibility, and is scored by placing a 1 in either the safe or unsafe column, depending on your findings. The advanced warning signs category is also an area of collective responsibility and should be scored accordingly with a 1 in either the safe or unsafe column. The minimum number of signs required per work site are 2, and they should be placed facing oncoming traffic in both directions. In the most common setups where 2 signs are used, they should be placed approximately 10 times the posted speed limit in feet away from the front and rear of the crew truck and equipment. In situations where traffic needs to be regulated by flaggers, there should be 3 signs placed in each direction of oncoming traffic. The signs nearest the truck should be placed 10 times the posted speed limit away and should say "Flagger ahead." The next sign should be placed 100 feet further down the road from the first sign and should say "Prepare to stop." The sign furthest from the job site should be an additional 100 feet down the road and should say "Workers ahead." Flagging operations are a collective responsibility and should be scored with a 1. Another area to be scored collectively is channelizing devices, most commonly cones. At speeds of 40 miles per hour or less, cones should be placed about 25 feet apart, beginning at the side and rear of the work truck and continuing in a straight line down the road for a total distance of approximately 100 feet. An additional cone taper is then set, beginning at the last cone in the 100-foot buffer and angling toward the shoulder of the road for a distance of about 50 feet. Speeds of 45 miles per hour or more require a cone buffer of 200 feet, with an additional taper of 50 feet. Cones should be spaced apart a distance in feet equal to the speed limit. For instance, if the posted speed limit is 45 miles per hour, cones should be placed about 45 feet apart. Cone placement should begin at the side and rear of the work truck and continue in a straight line down the road. It's also important to note that some states and locales may have different traffic control standards, and it's the responsibility of management to be aware of and to comply with them. Flagging operations are another collective responsibility category scored with a 1. While the procedure is referred to as a flagging operation, it is important to note that paddle signs, not hand flags, are used to regulate traffic flow. Hand flags are only to be used in emergency situations. Otherwise, paddle signs are the appropriate flagging device. When observing flaggers, note where they stand. The safest location is generally at the point where the last cone of the taper area meets the shoulder of the road. They should never stand in or near a traffic lane. Make sure that if 2 flaggers are used to control traffic in each direction, that they can see each other. If not, an alternate means of communication, such as walkie-talkies, should be used. Pay particular attention to how well flaggers control the flow of traffic with their paddle signs, and determine whether or not proper hand signals are being used. The collective responsibility of vehicle parking refers to several different safety concerns that should be taken note of. First, whenever a truck is parked, wheel chocks must always be placed in front of or behind the rear tires on the driver's and passenger side. Exact placement will generally be determined by the slope of the roadway. Parking brakes must be securely set, and the keys removed from the ignition whenever trucks are stopped. If the crew is working away from the truck, the cab and storage cabinets should be secured to prevent theft. Slips, trips, and falls are a common workplace injury. Observe the crew's work area to determine if they can move about without having to step over or around obstacles, tools, and piles of brush. If brush has been piled, or if work is being conducted in brushy areas, clear pathways should be created by the crew as part of the requirement to eliminate known job site hazards. Holes, downed fences, debris, and other hazards that cannot be removed should be clearly marked to warn anyone approaching them. Count the number of times workers are observed encountering trip and fall hazards while moving about the job site. Record each incident as safe or unsafe. It's possible that there will be multiple observations scored within this category. Pre-climb inspections must be conducted prior to any trimmer leaving the ground. When observing a climber preparing to ascend a tree, observe whether or not they thoroughly examine their gear, ropes, and knots. Also, note how the pre-climb assessment of the tree is done. Does the climber appear to check the root collar and other areas of the tree for decay, damage, or dead hanging branches? Does there appear to be a climbing route determined? And has proximity to power lines been taken into account? It is possible to question climbers after the fact to determine whether or not all pre-climbing safety factors were taken into consideration, but remember, behaviors must be observed in order to be recorded. Again, there may be several observations recorded in this category. In some instances, there may be 2 climbers on a crew working aloft. If one does a proper pre-climb assessment but the other doesn't, it would be scored as 1 safe and 1 unsafe. If a single climber is observed climbing more than 1 tree during the visit, an observation should be recorded for each pre-climb inspection that should have been done prior to climbing each tree. Serious injuries occur each year to climbers who were not 100% properly secured while performing work aloft. There are several different items the observer should take into account while evaluating climbing operations. Climbers must always use an approved climbing saddle and be secured with a lanyard or climbing line when ascending. The only time a climber is not required to be secured after both feet leave the ground is while ascending a ladder. But once leaving the ladder, they must become and remain secured until they return safely to the ground. Work can never be performed from a ladder without the worker being secured via a lanyard or climb line. After completing the climb and prior to beginning trimming operations with a power saw, climbers must be secured by 2 different means, such as a lanyard and tie-in with their climbing line. Take note of where climbing lines are crotched. Lines should be crotched as close to directly above the work area as possible, placed around a main lead, and positioned in a way that should the climber lose their grip, they will swing away from any nearby power lines. Aerial lift operators must be secured to their buckets via a belt or harness and bucket lanyard before moving the boom, and should remain secured until they return the boom to its cradle. When using a belt, the lanyard should be no longer than 24 inches. The 100% tie-in category is another where there can be multiple observations recorded. The bucket operator who goes aloft without securing their lanyard, realizes it, and then secures themselves would be scored as a 1 unsafe. However, if acts are witnessed that could seriously threaten someone's well-being, work must be stopped immediately and the situation addressed according to regional and corporate policy. Pruner operations refers specifically to the use of a pruning pole or hydraulic pruner to safely trim back limbs. It does not refer to how well manicured the tree is after work has been done or whether or not correct arboricultural techniques were used. Multiple scores may be assessed as a worker moves from one location to another performing separate prunings. Rigging techniques should be used when portions of trees being removed require complete control while being lowered. The rigging rope must never be set in the same crotch as a climber's line, and the crotch must be strong enough to support the strain of the additional load. Trimmers must use only those knots approved by the company, and workers on the ground must remain out of the line of fire. Multiple scores may be recorded if multiple rigging scenarios are witnessed. Minimum approach distance, or MAD observations, are recorded whenever workers are working near high-voltage hardware, where there's the real possibility of direct or indirect contact. Workers' booms and conductive tools must never approach inside of the acceptable MAD. Again, as trimmers and aerial lift operators move about their work, there may be multiple scores within this category during the observation process. The ongoing communication category refers to the requirement for audible two-way communication between workers whenever line-of-fire circumstances are encountered, including but not limited to dropping branches, tree removals, raising or lowering dump beds, lowering outriggers, lowering tree parts during rigging operations, and some traffic control situations. The minimum requirement is an audible warning and an audible response. Multiple scores may be recorded. Tree felling operations are scored according to the following conditions. First, a detailed tree felling plan must be developed and communicated to all crew members. All persons assisting with roping must be a minimum of 1.5 times the height of the tree away, and any person not involved in the process must be a minimum of 2 times the height of the tree away, not just from the intended direction of the fall, but in all directions. The person performing the saw operation will provide audible warnings before starting their notch and prior to making the back cut. 2 possible escape routes should be planned by the feller at approximately 45-degree angles from the direction of the intended fall. And escape paths must be clear of anything that would impede a clean escape. Each tree felling operation will be recorded as one observation. As previously discussed, notching and back cutting can either be observed at the time of a tree felling operation or soon afterward, usually within the same workday. Each notching and back cut or observed stump will be scored as one observation. If there are multiple trees felled or multiple stumps inspected, there will be a safe or unsafe recorded for each observance. Hard hats, safety glasses, proper footwear, and traffic vests will directly correlate with the number of people on the crew being observed. If there are 2 people on the crew and both have their hard hats, safety glasses, traffic vests, and proper footwear on, a 2 safe would be scored in each of these categories. The observations within these categories should never exceed the number of people on the crew. Unlike some of the other categories, if a worker was observed wearing their hard hat in one work location but then moved to another task where it was not worn, this would not be recorded as 1 safe and 1 unsafe. It would simply be recorded as 1 unsafe, because these types of protective equipment are required to be worn at all times while working. Hearing protection is protective equipment that is only required for use in certain circumstances, and therefore may be scored multiple times. Workers must wear approved hearing protection whenever they're within 25 feet of an operating chainsaw, chipper, blower, or mowing unit. If a worker is observed using a chainsaw to cut up brush and is not wearing hearing protection and is then seen placing brush into a running chipper while wearing hearing protection, they would receive a score of 1 safe and 1 unsafe. CHAPS, like hearing protection, is protective equipment that is only required at certain times. In this case, while operating chainsaws or brush saws while on the ground. Clearly, there may be multiple scores recorded in this category for each instance observed where CHAPS are required as PPE. Safe backing up procedures must be observed in order to be recorded. Large work trucks should never be backed without the assistance of a backer using approved hand signals. Watch the backer to see whether or not they stand where the driver can see them in their side view mirrors. If the backer changes position and temporarily cannot be seen in the driver's mirrors, note whether or not the driver stops backing until he regains sight of the backer. Also, listen for audible communications between the backer and the driver. Remember, ongoing communications should be a 2-way exchange. Multiple scores may be assessed depending on how many times the crew is observed backing a vehicle. Safe following distance can only be recorded through direct observation, and the opportunities to evaluate this behavior are fairly limited. However, should the opportunity arise to observe whether a crew maintains safe following distances, note whether they keep a minimum of 4 seconds travel time between themselves and any vehicle in front of them. This can be done rather simply by watching when the rear portion of the front vehicle passes a certain point and then counting 1001, 1002, 1003, 1004. If the front end of the crew truck passes the noted point before the count reaches 4, the crew is not maintaining a safe following distance. Also, take note when the crew truck comes to a stop behind other vehicles. Does it appear they're leaving a liberty wedge between themselves and the car in front? While this category could be scored multiple times if the crew is observed driving more than once, the opportunities for multiple observations would be somewhat rare. Multiple observations can occur when observing workers operating chain or stick saws. Separate occurrences for chain and stick saw work can be recorded whenever an employee moves to work in a different spot. Or if the saw is turned off, the employee does another task and then returns to the saw. When starting a chainsaw, the saw must either be held securely on the ground with a straight left arm and the brake set, or the leg lock technique may be used with the chain brake engaged. At no time shall drop starting a saw be acceptable. Employees must hold the saw in both hands when being used and maintain a proper grip. The thumb of the left hand must wrap completely under the top bar. Saws should never be used above shoulder height. If the saw operator must move more than 2 steps in any direction, the hand brake must be set or the saw shut off. Other employees must maintain a distance of at least 10 feet from those using power saws. If 2 saw operators are working in the same general area, they must maintain 20 feet of separation between them. Ground workers must feed chippers from the curb side whenever possible in order to avoid being in the line of fire of oncoming traffic, and chippers should not be fed from directly behind, as debris can sometimes eject from the chipper. Only manageable pieces of wood should be put into the chipper, with the largest end being inserted first. Once the chipper grabs onto the brush, the operator should turn away quickly toward the tongue of the chipper in order to avoid being struck in the face. Branches with multiple forks must be reduced to single straight pieces in order to keep the forks from rolling violently when being fed into the chipper and possibly striking the operator. Smaller pieces must be fed into the chipper using a push stick or larger branch. Rakes, shovels, and other equipment must never be used to push brush through a chipper. Employees should never try to force or feed brush into the mouth of a chipper by kicking or pushing it with their foot. Also, hands, feet, and other body parts must never be placed on the feed table while the chipper is running. Loose clothing and cuffed gloves can easily catch on brush, causing the operator to be pulled toward the chipper, so wearing them must be avoided. Rakings fed into a chipper may contain small rocks or other solid debris that could damage the chipper, creating a safety hazard for the employee. Instead, raking should be swept up and placed in the back of the dump box. Multiple observations can occur whenever a chipper is shut down and then restarted. Outrigger placement is another of the collective responsibility categories and is generally only recorded once per evaluation. Outriggers must be used whenever the aerial lift is removed from its cradle, and pads must be used whenever the outriggers are set. Outriggers should never be set on manhole covers, puddles, or icy ground. Both feet on the floor of the basket observations may occur multiple times during an SBA as the operator moves around to different work areas. During the observation, note whether or not the bucket operator leans excessively over the edge of the bucket, causing one or both of their feet to raise. If the operator is trimming in one spot and is observed raising a foot from the bucket floor and then moves to a different area and is seen keeping both feet down, they would be scored as 1 safe and 1 unsafe. Move, don't reach observations can occur in almost any situation where a worker attempts to reach out away from their body to perform their work, instead of repositioning and not reaching. But in most cases, this is an observation used for bucket operators and climbers. Bucket operators are often observed reaching out further than is safe, instead of moving the bucket into a better position. The same is also true of climbers. Of course, multiple observations can occur during one evaluation period. Back injuries and muscle strain are another common injury in the workplace. Most of these injuries could be avoided if proper lifting techniques were used. Observe how employees lift brush and other items from the ground. Do they bend their knees and keep their back straight? If not, these would be examples of unsafe behaviors. Also, note whether employees get assistance from others when lifting heavy objects, instead of trying to horse them. It's very easy to record a significant number of lifting observations, as each time an employee picks something up, this is occurring. Line of fire situations occur in our workplace on a fairly frequent basis. Anytime something can travel with force or release violently with the potential of striking someone, it is a line of fire occurrence. Probably the most common types of line of fire situations we encounter in our workplace are from dropped branches and during tree felling operations. However, wood being removed while under tension, trees lying on power lines, rocks and debris being thrown by mowers, and many other circumstances can possess line of fire potential. The SBA observer may encounter several different types of line of fire circumstances during their visit, with multiple scoring opportunities. Under the heading of housekeeping are the equipment and vehicle categories. Typically, only one score will be assessed per visit in each category, with a 1 being entered into either the safe or unsafe column. Equipment cabinets should be opened and inspected for neatness and organization. Evaluators are not expected to begin pulling equipment out to inspect for damage or maintenance problems. Cabs should be inspected for cleanliness and organization, and sign boxes should be checked for debris that could fly out during travel. Once the evaluator has completed scoring the behaviors of the crew, the process of presenting the information and discussing it with them begins. Remember that the process is intended to be a training experience as well as an information gathering session. Employees may be a little nervous and may even become somewhat defensive, so the information must be presented in a constructive manner if it's to be effective in reinforcing good behavior and changing the negative ones. It's time to start the third step of the 6 SBA procedures. First, comment on the good things you've seen. There are most certainly some good behaviors to observe on every crew. This should help set the crew somewhat at ease and open them up to being more willing to listen to what you have to say.
Well, first I want to thank you again for letting me observe you while you've been working. I also want to let you know that the information I've gathered here today will be added into a computer database with all other SBA information that we gathered from around the entire company. Our goal is to be able to use the data to determine where we need to focus our safety efforts and training in order to help keep all of our workers safe. Let's face it, what you guys do every single day is very dangerous, and we take keeping you safe very seriously. From watching you work, I can tell that you're all very good at your jobs. I really liked how well you set up your job site. Your cones and signs were placed exactly where we'd expect them to be. And I noticed that you always looked to see if there was any oncoming traffic before you walked behind the chipper. I was also very impressed with the way you were in constant communication with each other. We all know how important that is in our line of work. And Lon, I want to commend you about something else I noticed. I love the way you kept a constant eye on your bucket operator when he was in the air. You are his lifeline when he's up there. If he gets hurt, it'll be up to you to know what to do to get him down. And it's also important for you to know where he's at in relation to the conductors before he touches the chip or a truck. Good job.
Once you've commented on their good behaviors, it's time to move to step 4, commenting on the possible consequences of unsafe behaviors. You'll notice that the form doesn't say, "Tell them what they did wrong." That kind of approach may put the crew on the defense, shutting down everything you're trying to accomplish. Try to cover all negative behaviors in a non-confrontational way. It may not be easy at first, but with practice, it should become easier and easier.
Can any of you tell me what the term widowmaker means?
Yeah, widowmaker is a limb that fall out of a tree, come down and hit somebody and kill them.
Exactly. And that's just one of the reasons why it's really important to do a thorough inspection of the work area before you start working. One of the concerns I had when I watched you work was a couple of dead branches in the trees above you. I noticed that you indicated them on your job briefing, but you still walked under them. One of the 5 components of the job briefing is special precautions. What kind of precautions could you have taken in regard to those dead branches?
Well, I guess we could have blocked off the area underneath there so we didn't keep walking through there.
Exactly. You could have taken a couple cones and put them under the tree to remind you to avoid walking there. It's not much, but at least it would have been something. And certainly better than being clocked by a falling branch. Let me ask you guys something else. Have you ever heard the stories about chippers coming undone and hitting other vehicles?
Yeah, I remember hearing about the one that happened not too long ago. It came off and rolled about 3/4 of a mile. Man, were they lucky.
Yeah, they were lucky. Although in our line of work, luck isn't something we want to rely on. The reason that chipper came off and rolled by itself down the highway was because the crew didn't do a walk around of their equipment before they left the job site. If they had, they might have noticed that the safety pin in the pintle hitch was missing. The only thing that stopped that chipper from continuing on down the road was the chipper brake cable. When the chipper came loose from their truck, the brake cable activated the chipper's safety brakes, causing it to slowly come to a controlled stop. One of the things I noticed as I inspected your equipment is that your chipper brake cable is connected to your tow chains. Now, what would happen if your chipper came loose while you were driving down the road?
Guess the chipper brake wouldn't work and it'd just flow freely down the road.
Right, and no telling what it might run into. I know none of you would want to be responsible for seriously hurting someone else.
No, we wouldn't.
So can I get you guys to reconnect it before you leave here today?
No problem. I'll take care of it as soon as we're done here.
The supervisor has successfully addressed 2 unsafe behaviors and their possible consequences without becoming negative or accusatory. He's managed to successfully address Step 4 and is ready to move on to Steps 5 and 6, discussing other safety issues and getting an agreement to work safely.
So are you guys aware of our return from the holidays safety focus?
Yes, we went over to Bulletin Monday morning in our safety meeting.
Great. The reason we have safety awareness programs after some holidays is because we find that accident rates tend to go up immediately afterwards. Our hope is that by raising employee awareness through bulletins and special programs, we can prevent at least some incidents from happening. It's really all about prevention through greater awareness. I hope it's helped to remind you all to think long and hard about your own safety before and during every job you do.
Actually, it has. We're trying hard to take a little extra time to consider all our work activities.
Great. I'm glad to hear it. No matter what else you think about your work or this company, I want you to know that what drives our safety program is you. We want you to go home every night in the same condition as when you came to work. So let me just kind of summarize what we've talked about here today. We talked about doing a complete walk around of equipment each time before getting into the truck and driving off to make sure everything's secure, right?
Right.
And we also talked about doing something to address or take care of the hazards we noticed during our job briefing and why it's so important to do.
Yes, we did.
Excellent. Listen, guys, I want you to continue doing all of the good, safe things that I've seen you doing, but I need you to work on the concerns we talked about. Can I get you to do those things for yourselves?
No problem. Thanks for pointing them out to us.
Thanks again, guys. I just need you to sign here at the bottom, acknowledging what we talked about today, and I'll let you get back to your jobs.
The SBA process is only as effective as the people doing them. When done right, you'll be able to create new and valuable lines of communication with your workers, and the information you feed into the system will be consistent and valuable. The end result will be a safer workplace for everyone.
Okay, thanks, guys. Please be safe.